short series, but a series of forums and debates that we're doing this year. Denver's top media organizations have partnered to host these forums. This one and another one Wednesday intended to promote fair, open, and ethical communications. These will be followed by an election, post-election discussion that we'll have on November 15th, in which we'll have reporters who have covered the election just talking about what they saw this year, what was different, how things went this year. Each event is free, open to the public, and being held here in the Denver Post auditorium. Tonight's event is we'll focus on Amendment 70, as you know, the ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage in Colorado from its current level of $8.31 an hour to $12 gradually by 2020. And as you'll see tonight, there are strong opinions and compelling arguments on both sides. These events that we're doing are intended to inform Colorado voters in a manner that's friendly, nonpartisan, and covers all aspects of the issues at hand. I'd like to acknowledge the partners that have made this possible. The Denver Post, of course, as well as Channel 7, Denver 7, the Denver Press Club, the Roosevelt Institute, and the Colorado chapter of the Public Relations Society of America. We'll be taking questions. I handed out some cards as people were coming in. We've got more cards, so when I'm done here, why don't you raise your hand, we'll make sure that you get a card. And if you could fill those out sooner rather than later, we can get them collected and look through them. We can't get them all to the speakers, but we'll get as many as we can. We are also broadcasting this, live streaming this on our Facebook live feed, and we'll be taking questions from Facebook. We'll also be taking questions from Twitter. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Aldo Svaldi, who's a business reporter who's been covering this for the Denver Post. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to introduce our panelists. On the pro-Amendment 70 side is Deborah Brown, manager of Colorado Business for a Fair Minimum Wage. On the opposed side is Tyler Sandberg. He's a campaign manager for Keep Colorado Working, which is a coalition of rural and small business advocates opposed to Amendment 70. We had a coin toss. We had a coin toss, and Deborah won. She chose to go second. So the first topic will be just having the panelists kind of discuss why we should vote for or against. We'll start with Tyler. Can you just briefly sort of summarize your key points, why Colorado voters should turn this down? And later we'll get into some of the specifics that are raised in these opening arguments. So give us your best pitch.
I think you can quote the Denver Post editorial board, who said this goes too far and it's the wrong solution for Colorado. We're not opposed to raising the minimum wage. We're opposed to the way Amendment 70 does it. It makes no exemption for agriculture. It makes no exemption for rural communities who are struggling right now. It makes no exemption for small businesses. It treats small family-owned businesses on Main Street in rural Colorado the same as it does big corporations in wealthier areas of the state. That's not fair, and that's not feasible for a lot of small businesses. So like the Denver Post said, it's going to hurt independent restaurants, and it's going to hurt waiters and waitresses and bartenders, because it's going to presage the end of tipping when you have a 70% increase in cost to restaurants. You've seen this in Seattle. 200 restaurants have stopped tipping. That hurts waiters and waitresses who make their money off of tips, and they're stuck making an hourly wage instead. So we oppose this measure because it's the wrong solution for Colorado. Walsenburg should not be paying, small businesses in Walsenburg should not be paying the same rate as big corporations in Denver, and this is simply not affordable. We only here because there was no compromises. There was no small business rate, no training rate, no teen rate, no exemption for rural Colorado. None of these were in this measure. Had compromises been made, there would not be an opposition campaign. So we're not opposing the minimum wage increase. We're opposing Amendment 70.
Okay, thank you. Deborah, your argument for?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having us. I'm here representing Colorado Business for a Fair Minimum Wage because gradually raising the minimum wage to $12 is good for business, it's good for the community, it's smart and it's fair. It's smart because it's a modest change phased in so business has time to adjust. It's a great Colorado solution. And our experience when we raised the wage in 2006 proves that when Amendment 70 passes, small business will thrive. In fact, it will contribute $400 million to the Colorado economy. Raising the wage is fair. Full-time Colorado minimum wage workers bring home less than $300 a week. That's just not enough to cover the basics when housing alone has increased 41% across the state. There are nearly 500,000 hardworking Coloradans who will benefit from Amendment 70, 200,000 of whom are parents with full-time jobs living in poverty with their children. That's unacceptable. Governor Hickenlooper endorsed Amendment 70 just today, and the majority of Coloradans support it too, because it's smart and fair.
Okay, thank you both. All right, let's start with what's been one of the most controversial points of this, but sort of the data. You know, intuitively, if you raise the cost of something, there's going to be less demand for it. And Tyler, your side cites a study from Eric Fruits at Portland State University that says Colorado could lose 90,000 jobs. Deborah, you have the University of Denver study, which you mentioned, which you know, cites the potential for a $400 million boost to the economy and helping 500,000 people, not just those at the minimum wage, but kind of in the tiers right above who will also see a boost. I guess, Tyler, we could start with you and just sort of the Eric Fruits study and kind of the multiplier, sort of the squeeze that will happen.
Sure. So Eric Fruits is a nationally respected economist on the impact of minimum wage. He did a study on Oregon's minimum wage hike and found that it would lose approximately 55,000 jobs. Well, 2 weeks ago, the Democratic governor of Oregon had ordered a report from the nonpartisan Office of Economic Research. This is a government agency. They have no dog in the fight. They're not ideological, ordered by a Democratic governor. And it found 40,000 job losses from Oregon's minimum wage increase. So Dr. Eric Fruits is right in line with nonpartisan, non-ideological government research. Look at the Congressional Budget Office. They found raising the minimum wage federally it's at $7.25. In Colorado, it's $8.31. They found if you raise that to $10.10, there'd be 500,000 job losses. So when you take out the ideological, the liberal and conservative economists, and you go to the government economists who have no dog in this fight and want to just put out good research for policymakers, they find statistically significant job losses. And so we say there's going to be a lot of job losses, and up to 90,000 is what the research shows. The other side says no job losses. But what voters should really understand is there are going to be a lot of job losses. Is it 90,000? Oh, that's what one economist says. Others say 0, so it's probably somewhere in between, and that's not acceptable. I want to ask the other side, how many job losses is too many for your measure? 10,000, 20,000, 30,000? When do you think it does more harm than good?
Okay, and Deborah, could you maybe tell us a little more about the University of Denver study?
Can I respond
if you
to
want to
that
rebut
first?
first.
Yeah. So there's decades of research and data using golden standard methodology that consistently finds the same thing. Modest gradual increases to the minimum wage, like the one proposed here in Colorado, causes little to no job loss, even in the industries most likely to hire minimum wage workers, and modest wage increases for low-wage workers. The truth of the matter is, the Fruits study was research for hire. It used cherry-picked outlier studies with negative outcomes, and it selectively cited ideas from studies while ignoring how those same sources contradicted its finding. The vast body of research that has been conducted, no job loss, little to no job loss.
To that? The University of Denver study was funded by one of their donors, which they did not disclose. The Women's Foundation has funded a lot of the organizations that are behind this measure, and in fact have said they're for it. And they admitted to directing the study, being involved in dedicating staff time, and they fund the University of Denver. So let's be honest, as I said, let's put away ideological research, a conservative researcher and a liberal researcher, and let's look at government research. And that found 500,000 job losses from the Congressional Budget Office. Or let's get away from projections. Let's look at real impacts, not what could happen, but what has happened. In Washington, D.C., they raised the minimum wage to $10.50 in July 2015, and again to $11.50 in July 2016. In the first 6 months of 2016, the D.C. restaurant industry has lost 1,400 jobs. It's the biggest loss in the D.C. restaurant industry in 15 years. They didn't even lose that many jobs during the 2008 recession. You have to go back to 2001 and the dot-com bubble burst to find a 6-month period where so many jobs were lost in the restaurant industry. And it's important to note that the restaurant industry is made up of minimum wage workers, but not really. They get minimum wage from their employer and the most of it from tips. So waiters often make $25, $30 an hour, although technically they're minimum wage workers because that's what their employer provides. But the vast majority of their income comes from tips, and 1,400 of them have lost their jobs from increased minimum wage hikes. This is not a study, this is real life impacts.
Hey, Deborah, well, you want to respond to that, but I guess talk more about the DU study, because I think the argument on the pro side is that this money will come straight back into the economy. It's not going to be set aside in savings. It's going to give a boost. But talk more about that. And I guess another point of that study was this idea of government assistance, that people who are self-sufficient are going to rely on taxpayers less. So.
Yep, you summarized it. All fine. So Amendment 70 will benefit almost 500,000 Coloradans who are working full-time. And as you mentioned, the University of Denver studies found that it will inject $400 million into the Colorado economy. It will increase the incomes in 1 in 5 Colorado families. 1 in 5 Colorado families. And it's needed in urban and rural areas alike. There's no county in the state where you can raise a child on $300 a week. And let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about what happened when we raised the minimum wage here in Colorado back in 2006. We didn't lose jobs. In fact, we added 73,000 jobs to the Colorado economy, 6,000 of which were in rural Colorado, 5,000 of which were in the restaurant industry. So again, this experience here in Colorado supports the national body of research that shows gradual, responsible minimum wage increases like what we have proposed here in Colorado is good for the economy, it's good for working families, and it's good for business.
Okay, so let's look at the reality of this. Because of minimum wage hikes to $15 an hour in New York and California, Wendy's has installed 6,000 kiosks in their stores across the country. So these are 6,000 people that don't have a job anymore. You don't order from a person at the front counter anymore, you order from a touchscreen. So those are 6,000 jobs that are permanently gone and tens of thousands of people that will never have that job. And so when minimum wage went from $5 to $6, you weren't able to, the big corporations weren't affording to put in technology. Now Applebee's and Chili's are starting to use iPads. But when you get to $12 an hour, and it's closer to $15 an hour for the cost of the employer because of unemployment tax, because of other taxes they have to pay. So about $15 an hour is what's going to cost employers. At that point, for big corporations, they can replace these low-skilled workers with machines, with iPads, with kiosks, and you literally price people out of jobs. And so they're saying there's very little impact between $5 and $6 an hour increase. But in fact, that's not true. If you look at the actual data, the restaurant industry, waiters and bartenders lost jobs over that period. And the minimum wage in 2006 had not raised in 8 years. It had been stagnant, had not changed a cent since 1998. Our minimum wage has gone up 61% in the last 10 years. 61%. And if Amendment 70 fails, it will keep going up because Colorado already has a law on the books where it's tied to the cost of living, the Consumer Price Index for Denver, Boulder, and Greeley, which includes the cost of housing, food, rent, durable goods, medical care. It's what it costs to live in the Front Range. And it goes up every single year. And so we're going to continue to have a rising minimum wage without Amendment 70. And that is something that the market can afford. It goes up with the cost of inflation, the cost of living. And it's been 61% growth in the last 10 years. So voters are not faced with, should we raise the wage or not? They're faced, should we raise it responsibly, or should we go too far and end up hurting rural communities, end up hurting small businesses, end up hurting independent restaurants? So the choice is between an extreme too far, as the Denver Post editorial board said, in a policy that goes too far, that is the wrong solution for Colorado, or a solution we already have on the books, which lets the minimum wage increase every single year. And in fact, we're one of the few states in the country that has that. So I would ask my opponent, at what point do you think people will be priced out of jobs? When do you think companies begin to start replacing them? $20, $30, or is it closer to $10 where it's affordable for people like Wendy's to literally not hire people anymore and put in a kiosk or an iPad?
So there's a lot there to unpack. First of all, this automatic minimum wage increase, it went up 8 cents last year. That's 8 cents. And if Amendment 70 doesn't pass, at the end of 2020, a minimum wage worker is going to be making $9.21. $9.21. In the past decade, wages have gone up by 20%, 21%, while the housing costs alone have more than doubled. And let's talk about Colorado employers. The majority of small businesses already pay their employees over $12 an hour. We're talking about businesses that are really doing the right thing already. Who's going to be hurt by Amendment 70? Well, maybe it's the businesses, the big chains that want to pay their workers poverty wages and force their employees to be working full-time and still relying on public assistance, food stamps. You are actually hurting the businesses that are already doing the right thing, the businesses that are paying their employee a livable wage and are thriving here in Colorado, because we as consumers, we support that. We know it's good for business. We know it's good for the economy. We know they're going to put it right back into the economy.
On that, you have the right to your own opinion, but not your own facts. The minimum wage has gone up 61%, not 21%.
No, I didn't say
515
that.
to 831. It was 515 in 2006. It's 831 now. The math is 61%, not 21%. So you have the right to your own opinion, but you can't make up facts here. And if you think big businesses should pay this because they can afford to, like the Walmarts of the world, then why didn't you have a separate rate for small businesses? Why didn't you raise the, because if you raise it for big businesses and treated small businesses differently, there may not be an opposition campaign. So please explain to the voters why you didn't treat small businesses different than big corporations.
And that's one of my questions. I'll interject here. I have to do a little a plug for our Facebook audience. For those of you joining us, this is Aldo Svaldi from the Denver Post, here with Tyler Sandberg, campaign manager of Keep Colorado Working, and Deborah Brown from the Colorado Business for a Fair Minimum Wage. We're debating the minimum wage amendment that's going to be on the ballot this November. If you have a question, please submit it via the Denver Post Politics Facebook page or via Twitter using the hashtag #TapTheVote. So, Deborah, I'll give you a chance to answer that. And Tyler's mentioned it more than once, but why didn't we create it? Maybe a tiered urban-rural wage, a small, big business wage. I know Oregon's done that. And what would you say? You know, if I'm a small business owner in Alamosa, barely making it, tell me how, $12 is going to benefit me or my employees, if I have to shut down. I guess why weren't different tiers put into this amendment?
So again, Amendment 70 is a gradual increase that gives businesses time to adjust. It gives businesses time. Business owners are smart, thrifty people. They know how to make adjustments to their businesses. And again, the majority of Colorado small business owners are already paying their employees over $12 an hour. And again, let's stop assuming that this is going to hurt rural businesses and it's going to hurt small business, because that's not what our experience here in Colorado shows. Back in 2006, as Tyler mentioned, we raised it 33% overnight, and we didn't see loss of jobs. We saw 73,000 jobs added to the economy, 6,000 in rural businesses, and as well as in the small businesses. So we see business growth across the board. This Amendment 70 is gradual, it's smart, it's fair. It's not going to hurt small business. It's not going to hurt businesses in rural communities. Those communities are going to benefit from that money going right back into the economy. Low-wage workers don't put their money in 401ks or send it to offshore bank accounts. They spend it on Main Street. So the businesses are reaping the benefits of the workers who are making more money.
You didn't answer the question. Why didn't you treat small businesses differently? Because big
Because they
corporations
don't
have lots of
need-
profit, but small businesses who operate in 3 and 4% profit margins, they don't have the money, so they're going to have to lay off workers.
We have over 150 businesses that have endorsed Amendment 70, and you should ask about the hundreds of businesses across the state that are already paying well above $12 and are thriving. Employers know that when they pay their employees well, they have less turnover. Their employees are more productive. They provide better customer service, which is good for consumers and good for the business's bottom line. We didn't make an exemption because they don't need it. Raising the minimum wage is good for business. It's good for small business. It's good for big business. It's good for businesses that are already doing the right thing by paying their workers a livable wage.
But almost all economic policy has exemptions for small businesses. Even Obamacare has an exemption for small businesses. Almost every single policy you ever write treats big corporations different than small businesses because they operate in really small profit margins. So if your average restaurant on a $15 meal, you want to guess how much the profit is for the owner of that restaurant?
It depends on the business owner.
So there's a national average, and it's 4%. So they make 60 cents, $15 meal, they make 60 cents before they pay taxes on that income. So if you raise their labor costs by 70%, which is what the waiters' labor costs are going to go up by, where are they going to come up with that? If they're only making 4%, the math doesn't add up. The math doesn't add up, and so when the math doesn't add up and they start losing money, they're going to have to lay off employees. So the Colorado Restaurant Association did a survey, asked their members, what would happen if you raised the wage to $12 an hour? And they said 90% said they have to raise prices, and that's probably fine in Cherry Creek. Wealthy areas of Denver can afford higher prices, but in Alamosa, where eating out as a family is a luxury and the cost of eating out goes up, families are going to potentially curtail that. That's not good for the restaurant. So 90% would raise prices. 72% would let go of hourly workers. So if you're trying to help hourly workers and they're being laid off because you didn't do a compromise with independent restaurants and the tip credit, how does it help them? 71% of restaurants said they have to cut hours. And so maybe people are getting more per hour, but they're having less hours, so they don't see any more money in their income at the end of the week in their paycheck. And 20% would close locations. So how does it help low-wage workers if small businesses are closing, cutting hours, and cutting jobs?
Again, that's not what the data is showing, and that's not what our experience here in Colorado
Actual
shows. So
restaurant owners.
I can't argue with hypotheticals of the boogeyman. It's just not what's really
These
happened
are
here in
real
Colorado.
restaurant owners who live and breathe 7 days a week their business. They know their books, and the national average for restaurants, full service, is 4%. If you're raising the labor cost by 70% for tip waiters, and they only make a 4% profit, the math doesn't add up, and so they're going to have to let go of workers. So why didn't you compromise on the tip credit? Governor Hickenlooper, who came out today after a lot of political pressure to endorse the measure, he said there's a big problem with the tip credit. He said there's a big problem with no agricultural exemption. He said there's a big problem with no rural rate. And you were putting this in the Constitution. This cannot be fixed. So why are you putting a flawed measure into the Constitution that cannot be fixed? Why wouldn't you fix it before it went into the Constitution?
Amendment 70 levels the playing field for urban and rural businesses alike. They can't compete with businesses that are undermining them by paying poverty wages. You see it as hurting small business. We see it as a leveling the playing field for businesses that are doing the right thing already and paying their employees over $12 an hour. Again, that's the majority of Colorado businesses that are already doing it. We have hundreds of businesses across the state that will tell you that it has increased their bottom line when their workers are more productive, when they can take care of themselves, when they get sick, when they can put food on the table. We're talking about 500,000 people who are going to get increased pay from this, and they're going to spend it at the local restaurants in the rural communities. Again, it's going to help small business.
Where do you think the money's coming from? It's not manna from heaven. It's not coming from big corporations being handed out $100 bills to low-wage workers. It's coming from small businesses, family-owned restaurants, multi-generational families on Main Street who run retail stores like hardware stores and sporting goods stores where they've hired 3 generations of family when they were teenagers who operate on 3% and 4% profit margins. This money is not coming from nowhere. You're saying it's going to inject the economy with money? What's coming out of local economy? It's coming out of small businesses who can't afford to hire people anymore. This is not free money. So where do you get this contention that all of a sudden it's going to be this big boost when people are losing their jobs? Like in D.C., what do you tell the 1,400 restaurant workers there who have no job now because of the minimum wage hike?
You can go ahead. We'll finish and we'll go to the next question.
Again, this is what's happened in Colorado is this idea of this job loss that always seems to come up when we have ballot initiatives and laws that try and put money in the hands of hard-working people, like Amendment 70, who helps people who are working full-time and still can't make ends meet. This money is going back into the economy when they spend it at local businesses. This is not, these people who may have had 2 jobs before, they may now be able to have 1 job because they're making enough to not have to choose between putting food on the table and buying medicine for their kids. It's going right back into small businesses because we know that's where local people spend their money. They spend it locally.
And Tyler, to play off what Deborah said, but you know, if you talk to restaurant owners, they're already paying $15 an hour to have tables bussed. I think McDonald's and Walmart are getting towards 11 or higher. Aren't we already going to 12? I mean, in some sense, doesn't this just codify what's happening in the market? And why not protect certain workers, home health aides, others that just...
Bussers are making $15, $20 an hour, but the restaurant owner is only paying them $5.29. The rest comes in tips. So this is the cost to the actual restaurant owner. But yes, it is already happening. The Denver janitors just signed a union contract about a couple months ago for $15 an hour minimum. And it's because they could afford it in Denver, because you see booming construction, you see cranes everywhere, you have an economy that can take it. But in Walsenburg, they can't afford $15 an hour there. So it's not what people should be paid. We all want to pay people a living wage. There's no one in this room who says people don't deserve a living wage. It's what the economy can afford. And so you can't take money from small business owners who will shut down and claim that's going to help small businesses, it's going to help low-wage workers. Because if they lose their job or lose hours, that doesn't help them. So yes, people should pay the wage they can afford, but if you force a wage increase that, yes, can be afforded in downtown Denver, but no, can't be afforded in rural Colorado, you hurt rural Colorado. And this is why we asked for a rural Colorado rate, and the other side refused. So that's why we say vote no on Amendment 70, because it didn't make the exemptions that were necessary. In downtown Denver, they can probably afford it. Big businesses in downtown Denver, yes, they can afford $12 an hour, but small businesses in rural Colorado cannot. And that's the problem with Amendment 70, because they did not recognize that difference.
A quick commercial, but again, if you're joining us on Facebook Live, this is Aldo Svaldi with the Denver Post. I'm here with Tyler Sandberg with Keep Colorado Working and Deborah Brown with Colorado Business for a Fair Minimum Wage. We're debating the ballot measure to raise the state's minimum wage to $12 an hour in November. You can submit questions at Denver Post Politics, our Facebook page there, or via Twitter using the hashtag #TapTheVote. And Deborah, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, what do you say to the families that are having to choose between putting food on the table and clothing their children? There is not a single county in the state where a parent can raise a child on less than $300 a week. They need this raise. They need it in rural Colorado. They need it in urban Colorado. And again, the vast majority of research shows time and time again, as does our experience here in Colorado in 2006, that this wage raise is gradual. It gives business time to adjust. It is not going to cost jobs. They are not going to be an overwhelming number of businesses that close their doors. It is going to help the economy thrive, just like the vast body of research shows, just like our experience here in Colorado in 2006 shows. And again, we're talking about 1 in 5 families whose income is going to go up. And we haven't even talked yet about who these low-wage workers are and why they need this raise.
Let's talk about that. So to the single parent who is struggling minimum wage, we want to help them. But there's ways to help them. You increase the earned income tax credit. You get money directly to them. You help them get job training. You help them get better jobs. But there's no reason to help because it really is the exception. The full-time worker is actually a minority on minimum wage workers. 2/3 of minimum wage workers are part-time. So this idea that all these people trying to survive minimum wage is not true, but they do exist. They're the exception to the rule, but they exist. And so we can help them in a targeted fashion. You can help them get better jobs. You can help them get more in earned income tax credit. There are a lot of ways to help them that don't hurt small businesses. Because what's really important here is who is the minimum wage worker. Half of them, according to the federal government, are under 25. Almost 2/3 are under 30. And as I said, 2/3 are part-time. So this whole idea that there's people living off this is statistically, the rule in general is not true. And in fact, the average family income of a minimum wage worker is about $55,000 a year. The average family income for Colorado families is $61,000. So the majority of minimum wage workers are living at home in their teens or 20s, or they're a spouse that has another spouse earning money. Only 6% of minimum wage workers are supporting themselves. 6%. And there's ways to help that 6% without harming the entire economy. Let's also be honest, but what the percentage, because yes, the vast majority of small and big businesses pay more than $12 an hour. Only 3% of workers nationally make minimum wage. It's a very small segment. So if you want to help a small segment, you draft a policy to help that small segment. You don't take a meat cleaver into the Constitution and affect the entire state. You don't hurt family farms, rural Colorado, independent restaurants. You help the people in need. You don't put a constitutional amendment in that can never be fixed. If there are problems with the constitutional amendment, we cannot fix them. In Oregon, they have 3 different rates: a rural rate, a Portland metro rate, and a major county rate. In New York and California, if there are recessions, they can pause the minimum wage increases. You can't do that here. In Baltimore, there's an exemption for people with less than 50 employees. So other states have been smart in how they write a very vast and sweeping economic policy. You have 2 sentences in the Constitution.
Well, if you could start by talking about who are minimum wage workers in your research, what it's showing, and this idea of the constitutionality of it, that it is sort of set in stone.
Sure. So Amendment 70 will benefit 480,000 Coloradans who are working full-time. And this is 1 in 5 Colorado families. Again, these are not teenagers that are just putting in extra money for games at the arcade, like Tyler suggests. 9 out of 10 are people over the age of 20. That's 9 out of 10 people who will be impacted by Amendment 70 are over the age of 20. And the average age of a low-wage worker is 35 years old. We're not talking about teenagers anymore. This is the reality of our Colorado economy now. We're talking about people who are trying to raise their kids. 200,000 parents are trying to raise their kids, and they're living in poverty. That's not acceptable. That's not a Colorado value. These hardworking Coloradans are making important contributions to our society, and they deserve to be compensated fairly for their work.
Those facts are as fraudulent as the signatures
finished.
you turned in.
Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. I'm not finished. $12 an hour by 2020 is a reasonable, modest increase. Not like other places that just went straight up to $15 overnight. This gives businesses time to adjust while at the end of the day, giving hardworking Coloradans the money they need to take care of themselves so they don't have to put an undue tax burden on people and business owners that are already doing the right thing. And we tried to go the legislative route. We did. We tried everything. There's a rule that says we can't make separate policies for municipalities. We can't make city rules. So this was the option that had to be done to make sure that hardworking Coloradans can take care of their basic needs. We did what we had to do, and we are going to win in November.
Okay, we have some additional questions. Okay. I was going to get into the tipped wage. I don't know if you want to spend a little bit of time on that, but some of the strongest opposition is coming from the restaurant industry. And Tyler, you mentioned the tip minimum wage is going to go from $5.29 to $8.98, which is 70%. The owners of the fresh fish company had this to say, other than my managers, my tipped employees are already the highest paid workers I have. This amendment will force me to pay my highest paid employees even more, leaving less money for the workers that the amendment's supposed to help. So why is that tipped wage such a hot button issue within the restaurant industry? If we could start with you.
Sure. Without getting too much into the weeds, waiters and waitresses, as Governor Hickenlooper himself has said, are often the highest paid people in the restaurant, often make more money than the managers because they make a lot of money in tips. In the Fresh Fish Company, their waiters make about $30 an hour, but the portion that the employer pays is $5.29. And that's why you can afford to go out and eat, because the restaurant owner only pays the minimum wage, but they still make $30 an hour. They're not minimum wage workers, although they're classified as such because that's what they get paid by their employer. But they make a lot of money. They can make $30 an hour, and that's really important for students, for working parents, because you can have flexible hours. If you can go in on a Friday night and make $300 or $400, that's a really great thing for working parents and for students who are in school. But in Seattle, what happened is when they raised the wage, 200 restaurants stopped tipping, and that hurts workers. Because when you tip a worker, a bartender, a waiter, that's their property. They can't be forced to share it with the owner. They can't be forced to share it with anyone else other than maybe the bussers who get tips. By law, it's their property. But when the minimum wage increased in Seattle, 200 restaurants got rid of tipping, and now they have service charges. Customers think, oh, that's probably going to the waiter, it's 20%. No. That is now the property of the restaurant owner, and they don't have to give a penny to the waiter. They can start paying the waiters $15, $16 an hour, where before in Seattle they were making $30 and $35 an hour in downtown Seattle. So you are harming low-wage workers. And so for restaurants, they're very frustrated. The ones in Denver are coming out of the recession, and they want to pay their workers more. They want to pay their cooks more and their dishwashers more, who are making between $12 and $15 an hour. But what this is going to do is force them to pay their waiters more, who already make the most, already make closer to $30 an hour. So it's not going to help on purpose the low-wage workers. And this Colorado Restaurant Association sat down with the proponents in March and said, can we please come up with a compromise in the tip credit so we can ensure that the low-wage workers in restaurants get the raise and not the high-wage workers? And they refused. They said, no, no compromise. And Governor Hickenlooper has been pretty outspoken about that. So why was Governor Hickenlooper wrong to criticize you on the tip credit issue?
Well, go ahead. Yeah, and I guess this idea of, was there a discussion, or why not just raise it 44% like you did the minimum, and sort of why the differential?
Okay, so the three things there is the Restaurant Association didn't come to us and compromise. They said we wanted 10-10 by 2020, and we said that's unacceptable to our workers. That is not going to help working families get out of poverty. So these negotiations, why didn't any of the three titles submitted by your campaign, why didn't any of them submitted by the Restaurant Association have rural allowances or a tipped wage credit? They didn't. So that's that. But let's talk again
They have
about...
a tip wage credit. They did. You want to read it on the Secretary of State's website? I mean, again, you have the right to your own opinions, but you can't make up facts here.
Well, you sure do. But that aside, let's talk about who restaurant workers are, okay? So there are 50,000 people, according to the Department of Labor, who are working as waiters and waitresses. They make a median wage, including tips, of $9.02 an hour. Now, that is a fact from the Secretary of Labor. So I don't know you don't like it, but sorry. And again, these are women predominantly, 85% over the age of 20 who are working on wait staff. They need a raise. $8.02 is the median income of a tipped worker, and that's not enough to get off by. So we didn't exempt them because they need the raise too. Also, let's talk about the restaurant industry as a whole. Restaurant employment is up 17% since 2008, and the industry is projected to register sales over $10 billion in 2006, growing 8% over the previous year. The restaurant industry in Colorado is thriving, and it's because people are going to continue supporting our businesses that we know Amendment 70, gradual, smart, and fair, will be good for these businesses, good for the restaurant industry, good for tipped wage workers, good for working families.
Ask the IRS. They say the majority of tip income goes unreported. So anybody here who's working in a restaurant, 1/3 of American adults get their first job in the restaurant industry, and half of all American adults work in it at one point or another. It's a great way to learn thick skin, to show up on time, to be part of a team. So the IRS says the majority of tip income goes unreported, so that number is false. But I want to ask people here, just think about your own experience. Do you ever remember working as a waiter and making $9 an hour? I don't think so. So that number is complete bunk.
I wonder where you worked. I mean, there's a variety of restaurants ranging from nice places to fast food places. And I mean, this is the fact, $9.02 is the average median wage. Also, if we can talk about, again, these businesses are already paying over $12 on average in general.
Because they can, and the ones that can't will go out of business.
But
and you force them to pay higher wages.
This is what I wanted to say. So we have been talking a lot about the restaurant industry, and the restaurant industry is important, but it is not the biggest percentage of low-wage workers who are going to be impacted by this ballot initiative. Amendment 70 is going to help not only 500,000 people, but we're talking about EMTs, we're talking about caregivers for the elderly and disabled, the most vulnerable members of our society. We're talking about preschool teachers and nursery school teachers. These people, we were talking to a home care health worker just last week who puts in 80 hours a week, and she's still struggling to make her rent. And that's not fair. That's not a Colorado value. That's not right. We talked to a waitress in Grand Junction. She takes home $8.52 after tips. She hasn't been able to fix her car. She has to rely on public transportation. That's not fair. These workers are a broad spectrum of people who are making valuable contributions to our society. They deserve to be able to make a livable wage.
So if he's only making that much, it means business is not doing very well. So if business is not doing well and you force a 70% increase, where do you think the money's going to come from? More customers aren't going to come in. If their business is barely struggling now, so she can barely make $3 an hour in tips, where is this new business going to come from that the restaurant owner is going to use to pay for the increase in wage? You can't. This is not free money. This is coming from small business owners, and in rural economies, they don't have the money they can inject. Downtown Denver does, but Walsenburg doesn't, and that's why I am here opposing this amendment. That's why 78 small business and rural Colorado advocate organizations are opposed, not to raising the minimum wage, but to the way you did it.
Okay, let me interject here. This is Aldo Svaldi from the Denver Post. For those of you joining us on Facebook, I'm here with Tyler Sandberg, campaign manager for Keep Colorado Working, and Deborah Brown from Colorado Business for a Fair Minimum Wage. We're debating the minimum wage amendment that's up this November. If you have questions, please submit them to denverpost.com politics, and there's a link for the Facebook page. You can also submit them via Twitter using the hashtag #TapTheVote. Now, this has come up. This is sort of the news of the day. But, Tyler, the governor, initially, you guys circulated comments. It seemed like he was leaning in your direction. He understands the tip wage issue. He's worked in restaurants. Today, he said on Colorado Matters that he is voting for Amendment 70, and to quote him, "I think in this country, if you work 40 hours a week and you work hard, you ought to be able to afford an apartment somewhere." Can you, what does his loss mean for your campaign, or what? What do you think came with the change of
Politicians' views
heart?
are not really important here. It's what's important is how it's going to affect actual people in Colorado, small business owners and rural communities. And there was a lot of political pressure on Governor Hickenlooper. The other side put a ton of pressure on it. But what's really interesting is that now he's a supporter of a constitutional amendment that cannot be fixed. It's interesting because he explained it's going to be bad for rural Colorado, it's going to hurt farmers across Colorado, it's going to hurt independent restaurants. So he already believes, even supporters of this amendment believe that it's a flawed measure. And if it's a flawed measure, why are we putting it in the Constitution? It does not belong in the Constitution if even the most outspoken supporters have listed for weeks on end their problems. So why was Governor Hickenlooper wrong last week when he criticized it, or the week before, or the week before? What's changed? Is it now not going to hurt rural Colorado? Is it now not going to hurt small businesses? Because he said so 2 weeks ago. Why was he wrong 2 weeks ago?
So Governor Hickenlooper is a restaurant owner, and he gets the industry. And he knows that at the end of the day, Colorado will be better off with Amendment 70. He endorsed because he knows that 500,000 people who are vastly in need of a raise will get it, and they're going to put that right back into the economy. He endorsed because he knows it is the right thing for Colorado. He knows that it's going to help small business to thrive. He knows that that's why we have over 150 endorsers. We have restaurants ranging from Illegal Pete's Counter Service to fine dining like the Ore House in Durango. We have a broad business contingency in retail, manufacturing, and all these different industries, including the restaurant industry, because they understand that good employers will do well with Amendment 70. Workers, working families will do well with Amendment 70. Amendment 70 is going to be good for the Colorado economy. That's why Governor Hickenlooper endorsed it. He knows it's going to be good for Colorado. It's smart, it's fair.
Why was he wrong 2 weeks ago when he said it would hurt farmers? It would hurt rural Colorado. It would hurt restaurants. Why was he wrong then?
Okay.
So,
if you want to answer, I can go to the next question. Deborah, and I'll put the heat on you a little bit, but 2 weeks ago, Fight for 15 was in town. They were rallying at the Capitol. They're pushing for 15. Why did you pick 12? And based on your arguments, why not go higher? You know, given raise the bars coming, some other things, this was your one shot, potentially. Why not go 15? Or why not follow the Obama administration at 10-10? Or why 12?
So this was a well-thought-out process. This wasn't something that we just pulled together overnight. Over 2 years of working to bring together stakeholders, business owners, community organizations, faith leaders, workers who are in the healthcare industry, and teachers who knew that something needed to be done. And when we thought about what would be best for Colorado, we came up with $12 by 2020 because it's a gradual, modest increase that will give businesses the time to adjust and at the end of the day still provide working families with enough money so they can cover their rent, their food, and not have to choose between getting their car fixed or buying their kid medicine. $12 was the right solution for Colorado, and that's why the majority of Coloradans support it.
It's interesting. That's not true. They told the Denver Post editorial board they picked 12 because that's what their polling told them they could pass. And I'm sorry, economic policy should not be dictated by the polls. It should be dictated by reality because it's your real lives you're impacting. You told the Denver Post editorial board that polling is why you chose $12 an hour. And it's not some grand experiment that was thought of in Colorado because they're exact measures, 12 by 2020, in Maine and Arizona, funded by the exact same California unions who are funding them. 91% of their money comes from out-of-state labor unions. And they have exact same measures in Maine and Arizona. So the idea this was bought out by Colorado, then why all your donors have the exact same measures on all across the country? And why did you tell the Denver Post editorial board that you didn't decide it was what right for Colorado, it was what you could pass? Why is polling dictating economic policy?
It doesn't. $300 a week is not enough for somebody to raise a child in any county in Colorado. You know that, I know that, voters know that. $12 an hour by 2020 is a modest gradual increase. It's smart, it's fair. It makes sure businesses can thrive, and it gives workers the money they need at the end of the day, period.
Do you really think that we should do economic policy going, what can we get? Let's go with that. No, it should be smart and dealing with real lives. You said on the record that it was because of polling. Do voters?
No.
Your
I did not
campaign
say that.
to the Denver Post editorial board said it was polling that dictated the $12 an hour. Is that the right way to write our Constitution? To write economic policy that affects real lives and put it in a Constitution where it can never be changed? You know how many times Colorado has changed its, put a constitutional amendment in and taken it out in Colorado's history? Once. Prohibition. So once it's in, it's there for good. So why would you poll in a measure that's going to be in the Constitution forever? Why wouldn't you think about what Colorado can afford and what would work for real people's lives? Why is polling dictating something that can never be fixed?
Did you want to answer? We can go to the next.
I feel like I've very clearly answered that it's about what is needed for here in Colorado. It's a great Colorado solution. I feel like at this point we...
Okay. Next set of questions comes from Alex Bliss. He's a sophomore at the University of Denver. He's from Chicago. He's majoring in international studies. He's part of the Roosevelt Institute, which is on 150 campuses nationwide. It's a group that attracts young thinkers, engaged in their communities, open to rethinking, how the future can play out. So Alex asked, and we'll start with you, Tyler. Young people struggle to find affordable housing. Why wouldn't raising the minimum wage help young people gain greater access to housing? And a lot of the pressure is coming from the housing market and the rents and the higher home prices. So can you address that issue of that this will actually help people live here and stay here?
Absolutely. The way to address affordable housing is to make housing affordable, not to raise the minimum wage that's going to cause job losses. Because at $12 an hour, you're not affording a $1,400 studio in Denver. What's important is there's many ways to affect this, and they think that somehow inserting 2 sentences into the Constitution that can never be changed is going to be a panacea for everything. You can have construction defect reform, bipartisan reform that would bring down the cost of housing, but that's not been done. So there's a lot of variety of ways to help with affordable housing, but raising the minimum wage in a way that hurts rural Colorado and hurts small businesses is not the way to do it. And again, we're not here opposing raising minimum wage. We could have done that, and places like Fort Collins and Denver metro area could have seen a $12 minimum wage, but places like Walsenburg would have longer to get there or a lower rate. And so there was a solution on the table that could have been resolved here. We could have had the minimum wage hike. We're saying that it's not right for Walsenburg. What's right for Denver is not right for Walsenburg. What's right for Walmart is not right for Alamos's family-owned Mexican restaurant on Main Street. And so there are ways to resolve this, but not with the one-size-fits-all measure.
Okay, and then Alex's question for you, Deborah, is colleges and universities employ a large number of hourly workers, including many students. If you raise the minimum wage that you pay these students and workers, won't that result in higher tuition, higher fees? And to students who are already burdened, they're graduating with huge amounts of debt. Isn't this? And there's a general question from the audience, from Hope, saying, is this going to contribute to inflation?
Yeah, so I think that the issue that we want to talk about is who these people are that are making money that will be put right back into the economy and the impact that's going to have on prices. So the most robust research shows that it's going to have little to no impact on stuff. And also, business efficiencies is part of the equation that we haven't talked about yet. So our endorsers, for example, in retail and manufacturing, we have Judy from Polar Bottle, and she always talks about she decided to raise her minimum wage to $12 back in 2012 because she thought it was the right thing to do. And she expected, like your study and some people think, that it's somehow going to hurt their bottom line. But what she found out is her employees were more productive, she had less turnover, and her per bottle cost actually went down. So she ended up making more money after raising the minimum wage. And we see this in businesses across the board because there are cost-saving efficiencies that go into effect when workers are being paid enough to be able to make their basic ends meet. So the University of Denver study concluded that impact on overall prices is small, to the tune of 0.1 to 0.2% per year over the transition period. And that's nothing compared to, you mentioned housing, 41% is what housing has gone up across the state of Colorado. So at the end of the day, the extra money in workers' pockets by far exceeds the very minimal, even negligible price increases.
Quick follow-up on that. Denver Post editorial board. So, to quote the Denver Post editorial board, this raise to $12 because there's no teen rate will effectively lock out teenagers and college students who are not, business owners are not going to try to take a risk on a 16-year-old. They're going to be on their phone half the time anyway. So the people are not necessarily going to want to hire 16-year-olds. What 16-year-olds do you know? I mean, the ones I know are on their phones all the time. And so a 16-year-old, it's their first job. They have to learn to show up on time, to be part of a team. And at $12 an hour, are you going to hire a 16-year-old? You're going to be far less likely to hire a teenager at that point. At $12 an hour now, you get an experienced worker. So you're going to want to have the productivity at $12 an hour. And so the study by Dr. Eric Fruits found that it would reduce teen employment, 16 to 19-year-olds, by 10,500 people. So if your first job is $12 an hour, a lot of people won't take the chance on a 16-year-old. So I don't understand that people are booing here that you think 16-year-olds are this amazing, productive people. They're 16, they're teenagers, they're hormonal. They're people that need to be trained and to be mature, to show up on time, to be respectful of their boss. And you think you're going to hire them at $12 an hour? I think it's going to be a lot less. And I think most people at home, not the union operatives who are paid to be here, but the people at home will recognize that $12 an hour is going to shut out a lot of teenagers. And more to the point, Wendy's now has 6,000 jobs that will never exist because they've been replaced by machines. So how does that help a college kid who can't get a job at Wendy's anymore because they don't exist? Because he or she replaced by a machine.
I don't know if you want to,
I don't-
Heather, we can go to the next. I need to do my
Well,
plug.
Can I,
but
I
yeah.
do think it is important to say that you are mischaracterizing the low-wage workforce. Again, we're talking about 9 out of 10. And for two reasons. 9 out of 10 of low-wage workers are over the age of 20. These are not teenagers that are just looking for arcade money. These are people who are contributing to their household incomes to keep them above the poverty line. And we're talking about women. We're talking about people who are raising their kids in poverty. And I very much take offense to your characterization of low-wage workers.
No,
These
no,
are
teenagers, not low-wage workers, teenagers.
Teenagers, I know more hardworking teenagers than there. I mean, okay. I think most people will agree there are a lot of hardworking teenagers, and a lot of those hardworking teenagers are helping support their families. That's a reality. That's the reality. These are not people who are just spending money. They need this money to survive.
Let's move on to some questions for the audience. First, I'll do the plug. This is Aldo Svaldi from the Denver Post, welcoming anyone who's joining us on Facebook. We have a debate right now on an amendment to 70 to raise the Colorado minimum wage to $12 an hour. I have Tyler Sandberg, who's campaign manager for Keep Colorado Working, and Deborah Brown with Colorado Business for a Fair Minimum Wage. First question from the audience comes from Ronnie of Southeast Denver. Do you think when Amendment 70 passes, there will be an incentive for people on welfare to find jobs? And I guess more generally, you know, the ratio of the population that's working has dropped, and there's some thought that that's because it's not worth their time, that there's not a wage that will draw them into the labor force. And I mean, will this bring more people into the labor force and make for maybe a more liquid labor market, I guess is what this question's asking.
Congressional Budget Office found the exact opposite, the nonpartisan. They found a lot of people would end up leaving the workforce at this point because there's less jobs available. And like Wendy's, if someone wanted to get that job, it doesn't exist anymore. So you literally begin to get rid of low-wage jobs. And that's the problem, is you literally price them out. At $5 and $6, you weren't pricing them out, but at $12 for a Chili's and Applebee's, they can just use an iPad. And have you been to a Chili's or Applebee's recently? They're starting to roll it out. So those jobs literally no longer exist. And so if the more you increase the minimum wage at a certain point, you literally price people out. And we know this. You don't go to a bank teller every time to get your cash. Now you go to an ATM. So this is naturally occurring without minimum wage hikes. All minimum wage hikes do are increase that, because companies want to find a way to keep their costs down. And if they can have a machine that doesn't call in sick, a machine that works every time, that costs no money, you buy it once, an iPad, and it works, they're going to do that. And literally, you're going to have low-wage jobs not exist in the economy anymore. In Seattle, tipping started to go away. Tipping is one of the most important things for flexible hour jobs, because you can make a lot of money in a few hours in a dinner service or a lunch service. A working mom can work an 11 to 3 lunch and then pick up her kid from school 11 to 2:30. Those jobs will start to go away. In Denver, talking to a lot of restaurant owners, they've started to change their model. They don't have full service anymore. These chef-owned restaurants are having you go up to the counter, you order it, and a busser will bring your food out. And we talked to the owners of these new places and said, why are you doing this? It's fine dining. And they said, we just can't afford the labor costs. So at a certain point, you literally begin to get rid of these jobs. And that's a huge problem, because you reduce the opportunity. In Seattle, after they raised their hike, they had 1% less employment. So 1% of people lost their jobs. And the average low-wage worker lost enough hours, they didn't see any more income. Their minimum wage in Seattle went up $1.50. And not anecdotally, the average low-wage worker has not seen a penny more in their income. They're going to say, oh, 7% of wages went up. Yeah, tech industry wages went up. And so the average Seattle worker saw a 7% increase, because they maybe went from $150,000 a year to $160,000. But the study done by the University of Washington, when they looked at low-wage workers just by themselves, found no new net income. So they're not getting tipped to restaurants now, so they're making much less money. 1% of them have lost their jobs in Seattle, and the average worker is not seeing any more money in take-home pay. So it didn't help them. It actually hurt low-wage workers in the city of Seattle. So our concern is that the more that you raise the minimum wage all across the state, and it levels so high, you literally make it easy for big corporations to just replace them. Small businesses don't have the capital to go buy lots of computers and lots of kiosks, so they have to lay off workers, and they have to potentially shut their doors, raise their prices. But big corporations will just start replacing workers, and that's not good, because those jobs then go away forever.
Deborah, can you offer the counter
Yeah,
to that in terms of, will this actually...
Well, so he brought up 3 points, and I'd like to address all of them. He talked about Seattle, he talked about automation in restaurants, and then I kind of answered whether or not people will enter the workforce, which was the original question as a result of Amendment 70. So can I
Yeah,
answer
if you-
each?
quickly.
Okay. So what happened in Seattle? The bottom line, there's more restaurants in Seattle today than there was before the minimum wage was increased. The University of Washington's study showed that Seattle wages increase has done exactly what it was supposed to do. Working families are making 7% more money than they would have without a raise, and businesses are thriving. Again, more restaurants are in business in Seattle today than they were before the minimum wage. And that's important. The automation, we have a business owner, a restaurant owner who always says that that argument's kind of like the red herring because it's consumer demand that necessitates servers and waiters and waitresses are part of the experience of going out in many places in many circumstances. And until people are willing to forego that and just frequent places that are automated, do you see that happening really in the restaurant industry in Colorado? It's just not going to happen. And to answer the question that was originally asked, yes, when people have the ability to work a full-time job and take care of their basic needs, you better believe they're going to do it. That's what studies show. That's what history shows.
Okay, I'll try to take one more question from the audience, and then we'll go to concluding arguments. We're short on time here, but if you could keep your answer short on this. This is from Ben in West Wash Park. He's basically saying opponents say the minimum wage can be raised because it will endanger economic growth. They also say it can't be raised during times of a downturn. And I guess this question is just maybe why now? When is a good time to raise the wage? Tyler, I'll ask you, why not now if the economy's moving along, unemployment's low? And Deborah, I'll ask you, why now? I mean, things are going good, wages are rising. So, I'll start with you, Deborah.
When's a good time? Now, and it's going to, because we already have a law in the books that raised the minimum wage every single year. It's gone up 61% from $5.15 to $8.31 in the last 10 years. And Amendment 70 fails, it will continue to increase with the market. But we're saying that if you go too far, as the Denver Post editorial board says this amendment does, it goes too far, you hurt rural Colorado, you hurt small businesses. And so now is the time to raise the wage, and we're going to do it because there's already a law in the books. Colorado is one of the very few states in the entire country that has a law in the books where the minimum wage goes up every single year. And so why do you pause it during recessions? Well, California, controlled 100% by Democrats, thought they should have pauses in there because it's economic policy and it's complicated, and if things start going in the toilet economically, you don't want to see businesses going under because they are forced to pay wages they can't afford. You'd rather have people being paid a lesser wage with a job than no wage if their businesses go under. So other states have done this, and they've recognized that when you write policy, you have to be careful with it because it affects millions of people's lives. You can't meat cleaver 2 sentences into the Constitution that even your own supporters admit is flawed. And that's the biggest problem here. This is not a law that can be fixed in a year. This is in the Constitution forever. So now is the time to raise the wage, and it's already a law. Now is not the time to raise the minimum wage 44% in rural Colorado, because you're going to have more harm than good done.
Okay, so the minimum wage goes up. Yeah, it went up 8 cents last year. That's 8 cents. If Amendment 70 doesn't pass, low-wage workers are going to be making $9.21 by the year 2020. $9.21. That's not enough, especially when the cost of housing across the state has gone up 41%, especially when you have 200,000 parents that are living in poverty with their children while working part-time. Now is the time that it needs to be done. We have EMTs that can't even take care of themselves. We have preschool teachers. We have teachers across the spectrum that are coming to work every day, and they see what happens when their parents are struggling. Because economic inequality is the biggest driver of the achievement gap. They see what happens when their kids come to school hungry. We have healthcare workers that are working 80 hours a week and still can't fix their cars. That's just not right. We need $12 by 2020. And it's gradual. It gives businesses time to adjust. It's good for business. They have time to get that money back from employees who are going to put it right back in the economy. Again, low-wage workers don't have offshore accounts. They don't have 401ks. They put the money right back into Main Street so that it's going to increase, not in 10 years, not in 20 years, but in 2016. We need the change now. That's why it has to be November.
Okay, let's wrap things up, and we'll end with maybe a minute, half a minute to a minute each on kind of your closing arguments. And then I have a few closing remarks. So Tyler, we'll start with you.
So I'd like to start with the Denver Post, and even Governor Hickenlooper, who's now come out in support of this, is he believes it's going to hurt rural Colorado. He believes it's going to hurt farmers. He said that farmers are going to have a good, plentiful crop, but they're not going to be able to break even because their costs of bringing in the crop are going to be so high. And he believes it's going to hurt rural communities. And the Denver Post said it's going to hurt college workers, teen workers. It's going to harm the restaurant industry. It's going to harm a lot of Colorado because it was not written in a smart way. So we're saying, we don't oppose the minimum wage increase, and it's going to go up anyway. We oppose the way they're doing it here. So emotionally, we all support raising wages, but we have to think rationally. Academic policy will rationally affect millions of lives. So think about what will really happen. And we say, and the Denver Post editorial board said, and Governor Hickenlooper said until he got pressure to come out for it, that this is going to do more harm than good. And this is in the Constitution forever unfixable. That's not where it belongs. Flawed policy does not deserve a place in our Constitution.
Deborah, final comments?
First, thank you, Aldo. Thank you to the Denver Post and Channel 7 for hosting us here tonight. Amendment 70 is a no-brainer. Raising the minimum wage gradually and modestly to $12 by 2020 is good for the Colorado economy, it's good for working families, and it's good for business. That's why over 150 businesses and a broad coalition of families, community leaders, and economists from around the state have endorsed it. And it's why the majority of Coloradans support increasing the minimum wage. Voters know there isn't anywhere in the state where a family can live on $300 a week. Not when the cost of housing has gone up 41% across the state. The truth of the matter is the minimum wage has just not kept up with the cost of living. That's why we have 200,000 parents working full-time and still raising their children in poverty. That's not consistent with Colorado values. This is about Coloradans, not special interest groups the opposition campaign represents. Amendment 70 will pump $400 million into the Colorado economy. That's why the governor and a majority of Coloradan voters are in favor of providing a lifeline to nearly 500,000 Coloradans in need of and deserving a raise. So vote yes for Amendment 70.
Hey, I guess you'll all agree with me, it was a lively debate. And I want to thank our two panelists for definitely a lively, robust debate, and which is what we're looking for, which we want, whatever side of the issue you're on. I also like to thank the organizations that made this possible. We're going to have an after party down the block at the Denver Press Club. That's at 1330 Glenarm Place. Please join us for cocktails and conversation. We'll have beer from Barrels Brewery. Again, I thank you for coming. Have a great evening. And don't forget our next forum a week from now, on Wednesday, October 5th. And that one will be on Colorado Care. Thank you very much.